My talk for this session is entitled The Weirdness of Myth. Nothing is much weirder than myth, and no one can read myth without coming away with a kind of tingly feeling that they've just encountered something very strange. The word weird itself, I am the linguist, it comes from the old Anglo-Saxon word for destiny. And destiny was seen as being controlled by invisible forces and gods and so forth, or the Norns of Norse lore. And it was something that seemed strange and was sort of scary and so forth. And now it's condensed in the modern usage to a marvelous word that's very hard to define. Well, look, if you read stories, say, look at the Nart sagas, you'll see a horse that has antlers. The antlers reach up into the sky. Another encounter, the villain is depicted as thundering darkness with glowing eyes. That's it, and yet it's supposed to be a tangible human villain. And I have one myth from the Ossetians that seems to be an alien abduction, and we'll talk about that in more detail. So, going through the material that I did, I was at times completely amazed at what I was reading. I thought, this is very strange, and in some cases I would leave the page and walk around a bit with this feeling almost of ominous something. I was evoked. I found myself affected by these, even though I've spent decades looking at the material. The myth has certain themes, for sure: heroism, villainy, love, fertility, children, so forth, war, birth, death, and these sorts of things. And it tells people how life is supposed to be, what it's supposed to mean, and so forth. The machinery for myth is a kind of machinery that constructs large-scale meanings, and by that I mean meanings not of a word, say, such as a glass of water, which I have as a narrator here. That's a small object. I give a word for it, the word glass, the word water, blah, blah. But for large-scale events and issues in life that are not subject to simple definitions, such as an object is, you can't make a meaning just for, you can make a meaning just for an object, but you can't for a process or a stage of life. Sometimes we give it, we say youth, coming of age, and so forth, but that's not particularly useful. And what myth is doing is trying to make sense out of these much larger processes, much larger, perhaps large-scale events. And so, for example, large-scale event might be a volcanic eruption, something like that. It affects an entire region. And typically that will be the topic of a myth. It's almost a matter of scale, or it's a matter of duration through time. And we cannot use the machinery, semantic machinery of words to do that. We have to resort to some other way. And one way of doing that is through the archetypes and narratives that emerge from myth. Similarly, politics does a similar thing. It tries to provide sense for the large-scale activities and developments in a society or a country at large. Now, what is peculiar to myth is it does this by evoking images. And a myth that doesn't bring up some kind of vision in the mind, however vague that may be, is not going to be a particularly effective myth, and it's probably going to be one that's going to be forgotten and lost. The ones that survive, and have survived for millennia, thousands of years, tens and tens of generations, are ones that have a very strong visual impact that sometimes is very complicated. It's not just a single image, not just glowing eyes or something like that, but an entire kind of scene unfolding, a kind of episode in some ways, though you're seeing something on the screen or a play on the stage, this sort of thing. Let me give you some examples from Greek rather. Oedipus. Well, he ends up sleeping with his mother, for goodness sakes. Oh my goodness gracious. And this, of course, is an obscenity, motherfucker, kind of thing in English. There's something wrong with this. This violates a profound taboo, that of incest. What's wrong with that? Well, the biologist steps in and say, hey, you don't want a society that tolerates it because it's biologically bad, and that society is going to become physically unhealthy, the individual. So it's adaptive to have incest for taboos. No, can't do it. Must go outside the tribe, must go outside the family to find a mate, so forth. Sometimes it's violated. We have societies where people marry cross cousins, they're called, and whatnot, but there are reasons for that. It has to do with dowries and trying to not to murder your wife and get more dowries, and you won't murder her cousins. But apart from those sort of exceptional situations, things like incest are a good, strong, and Oedipus violates that. It's even scary that he violates it without knowing that it's violated. And this kind of failure of cognition is a terror that everyone has. I've misinterpreted something. I've screwed up on something. Oh my goodness, I should have seen it coming. Unknown unknowns, if you want to do Rumsfeld's phrase. And Oedipus deals with unknown unknowns. He doesn't know that this is happening, and all of a sudden he's caught in it all, and it's one of the most ghastly things he can possibly imagine. His mother, Alceste, kills herself, he blinds himself, all hell breaks loose. Okay. Cadmos, this is one you may not have heard about. Cadmos in Europa, after which Europe gets its name. Europa's carried away by Zeus on the back in the form of a bull, blah, blah. Cadmos, her faithful brother, goes looking for her. He's said to follow a cow, and the cow drops down from exhaustion. He slaughters it, establishes a city, Thebes, and then before he can offer it up to the goddess, he has to wash it down. To get water, he goes and sends his men to a spring. He's got soldiers, huh? There's a giant serpent, a dragon at the spring, and it devours those men. And one or two make it back and say, Cadmos is this hideous serpent, belongs to the god of war, and we're violating its spring and whatnot. So Cadmos and the serpent. And this is one of the most nightmarish scenes in all of Greek myth, is this giant serpent attacking and killing and devouring. And it's become a topic of art with certain artists in the Renaissance. Okay. Another place involving serpents would be Eve in the Garden of Eden, and the serpent that guards the tree of the fruit of knowledge. And again, a snake is a scary thing. It violates human form. It violates vertebrate form, really. Although there are eels, there are salamanders like conger eel, it's a salamander. A siren, it's a salamander. They have almost no legs or no legs. So it's an adaptation that's occurred several times in the paleontology or the history of mammals. Still, the form violates our basic idea of what an animal should look like. It should have legs, for goodness sakes, and it should be able to walk around and whatnot. It doesn't do that. It crawls like an insect and so on, a worm. And so it's inherently an image that's somehow within the archetypal repertoire that we have built in as part of our history of a species that tells stories. It's in the nightmare category. And so when the Old Testament, Eve is persuaded to eat the apple, and then what happens after that, they're driven out, they're aware that they're naked, they become cognizant and all this. He's an embodiment of evil, this sort of thing, the serpent in Cadmos, the serpent's embodiment of evil. This is an image that is planted in your head. You've seen snakes, it comes up. You can imagine a giant one attacking everyone and so forth. And it's part of the horror of these tales. Now, one can do, and one has done, Claude Lévi-Strauss, the great French structuralist who analyzed myth, set up a whole system based on structural linguistics, where there are binary oppositions, a kind of joined together of opposites to produce a kind of what they call a marked form, a marked element. And in fact, one can analyze some of these myths so that the incest theme, or the attack of the serpent, or Eve and the serpent, all these things end up in a kind of diagram, and they're highly marked in some way. There may be some truth to that, the kind of algebra or logic of is something some way and something the other way, the kind of simple polarizations that typify so much of the mythology. Maybe a kind of thinking that is built in. It's a kind of first thinking. And in fact, we do see evidence for this in the structure of language. And if language went hand in hand with the evolution of thought and cognition, it's natural. One would expect this. Okay. So some of these images, when I say maybe they're explicable in some way, and that they are, in that regard, let's say, natural. Others resist such an analysis. And one of the best ones is the Norse god of war, Odin, who runs around with one eye. Well, there's an explanation within the narrative and within the mythology why he lost the other eye. He gave it to so he could drink at the spring of knowledge and see the future and all this, the spring of Mimir. Well, okay, that's a nice mundane explanation. It doesn't make any sense. Why did you have to give up his eye? Oh, the linguist says, oh, yeah, I have an explanation. The Indo-European word for eye and the Indo-European word for spring are very close, if not exactly the same, so it's a kind of confusion, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really take away from the weirdness of this old man running around with one eye staring at you all the time. And then we have the malocchio in Italian, the evil eye, across the Mediterranean. You stare at somebody, you're going to put a hex on them, and somehow, blah, blah. What's happened? Well, if we're lucky, we have two eyes, and then we go around that way. And having one eye is obviously a sign there's something wrong with that person. Something has happened here. And we have Cuchulainn, the great Irish hero, has war tremors. He goes into these weird distortions when he goes into kind of battle frenzy. And one of these is the bulging out of one eye and the shrinking in of another. There's an enemy among the monster people, the Famoir, within the Irish mythology. Balor of the evil eye has a huge eyeball. It sends out death rays. And he uses his eyeball on the battlefield and destroys his enemies with his death ray eyeballs. So one big eye. We find Cyclopes, plural of Cyclops in Greek, are depicted with one eye. And of course we know of Odysseus blinding the Cyclops and escaping from a cave in which he and his men are trapped. And the Cyclops can be rendered ineffective by the loss of the one eye. So here we have one eye. But the interesting thing is that Cyclops in Greek doesn't mean one eye. It means round eye. And of course, if you look at the details of Cuchulainn, he still has two eyes. The other one's just pulled in, and the other one's big and round. So there's a kind of funny sliding about here. We can't quite make up our minds in the tradition of whether we're really talking about one eye, maybe the evil eye, or just a big round eye. But if in fact we achieve the one eye by closing one and using the other one as a death ray, a kind of embodiment of the evil eye, the hex, the curse put upon somebody, well, maybe we have now a natural explanation where someone goes around with one eye, he has both, or she has both, but they're using only one and they're using it to cast evil upon you. And the idea there is that, excuse me, it goes back to a primitive idea that you see, not by light coming in, but by some kind of sight power going out. And little children have this idea. And if you ramp it up, you're going to project your evil wishes upon your enemy or someone you dislike by sending out your sight power through the big amplified eyeball. And this may be the origin of that. Well, I'm being very clever. I've come up with explanations for some of this stuff, right? And these may or may not be plausible. There may be alternative explanations. Excuse me, can we shut it down for a minute? It seems to be.
Yep, we'll just restart. just restart when you want to.
I see my voice is beginning to give out. This seems to be gratifying. It seems to be scientific or scholarly. But let's go back to some of the weird stuff from the Nart sagas. Let's go back to the horse with its antlers. Let's go back to the thundering darkness with glowing eyes. Horse with antlers. What does this mean? Can we explain it? Can we make this weird image that is evoked and given to us, can we tame it in some way? Can we wall off the threat or ill-defined message it seems to be conveying by some kind of explanation? No, but there was a burial uncovered at Pazyryk in Siberia back in the Soviet days. And in that was a harness. It was a horse buried with a chieftain and a chieftainess or whatever. And in fact, the headdress was a horse headdress that had antlers. Now, why would they put antlers on a horse? Well, there's a theory, in fact, that the earliest domesticated riding animal was not a horse, but a reindeer. And it took place in Siberia to get around in the deep snow before they came up with snowshoes, because the reindeer could do it and you couldn't. And then eventually when the people down further south where the horses were running around saw them doing it, maybe did some trading and say, hey, you know what they're doing? They're riding around on the back of this animal. Well, it's got horns, it's got antlers, blah, blah, blah. Well, we got the horse, we'll do it on our horses, let's try to catch a few and tame them. And then, but maybe we got to put some antlers on the horse because that's what the original was about. That's prototype thinking. the very first thing, that is in existence. That's another feature and dynamic and logic of myth, that a lot of the objects and people that emerge are the very first of their kind, and they define that kind. And in Norse, you see it all the time, that they give names to things. And so there's a bucket of water, and it's called sög or something like that. So they give names, and IKEA is still doing that. Go shop at IKEA, there's a name for everything. So it's become institutionalized. But in effect, maybe the horse with the antlers is actually a reindeer in disguise, because that was the prototype, and to change it over to a horse, it's very clever, huh? I'm pretty good at this. But still, the power of the image is still there. And unless you read or listen to me, or read some of my writing, you're going to just stick with that strange horse that has those antlers. Let's go to the glowing eyes and the thundering darkness. Well, the hero fights it, or him, it's an alternative. The hero is Roko, the Nart. The enemy with the glowing eyes is Tutaresh, a Nart. I've analyzed the name Tutaresh to be some kind of Indo-Iranian-like language, not quite any one we know, but something similar, where it means 2 stars. Oh, he's got 2 stars, okay. And we get nowhere. That's the end of it. They fight, the hero loses the first battle and has to renounce his kinship. He slinks off, a woman helps him, he returns back, his mother. He tricks the alternate storm, the evil, dark-eyed, glowing-eyed guy, Tutaresh, and kills him eventually. If we go to Hittite, who are they? These were the oldest Indo-Europeans that we know about that are attested, and we're looking back now maybe 2200 down to about 1400 BCE, so this is a Bronze Age civilization. The linguistic features of Hittite suggest that it was a very archaic offshoot of the original language, Indo-European. And there's a tale of the storm god, Tarhunash, or by his Hattic name, Tsaskapuna, the Hatti being the earlier people in the area. And he fights a dragon. And just like Sasroko fighting Totarash, he loses the first round. And the dragon says, I'm going to take something, I've granted you clemency, we're going to arrange a second duel, but you have to pay me something, and I want your eyes. He also wants his heart, but he wants his eyes. Huh. And the storm god now lacks his heart, and what was the straw man, and I think had no heart, or no brain, Wizard of Oz. He lacks courage, sort of like the cowardly lion or whatever. But he lacks courage, and he can't see, he's crippled. His wife helps him, and he goes back for a second fight, and he defeats the dragon. But he does it in a certain way. There's another theme going on, and this is the source of Romeo and Juliet. And that story itself probably is thousands of years old. At least the idea, it's a tearjerker, it's an archetype. The storm god has a son. The dragon has a daughter. Well, I guess she's not a snake, she's beautiful, so they fall in love, right? And he marries the daughter of the dragon. Now, in North America, we have what tends to be what's called a matrilocal pattern. And when you marry, if you're a man, you marry, you end up sort of spending more time perhaps with your wife's family than you do with your own anymore. And the Indo-European pattern was the other way. The woman came more or less to live with the husband and his people. But in Hittite, it's like North America. It's what we call matrilocal. So when the son of the storm god, who has no name, unfortunately, marries the daughter of the dragon, also has no name, he goes and lives with the dragon. He has to swear allegiance to the dragon. He becomes part of the dragon's family. Now, when the son leaves the household of Tarhunash, or Tsaskapuna, and to go join the dragon, Tsaskapuna, or Tarhunash, is entitled to ask for payment for the loss of his son from the dragon. Guess what he asked for? He asked for his eyeballs back and his heart. I'm happy with that, nothing else, you can go away now. Now he's ready to go back and fight. He's got his courage back and he can see. Now, it turns out that he too also has a daughter. Her name is Inara, or Inra, something like that. Probably a Caucasian word meaning the Great One, and it appears also for the name of the storm god in the Rig Veda, Indra, which is obviously not Indo-European name. That Inara brings booze. She's friends with the daughter of the dragon. She brings booze to the dragon. He trusts her, and he gets drunk and can't fight very well. So he's able, the storm god is able to defeat the dragon in the second round. But something tragic happens before the final denouement. The son of the storm god, of Tarhunash, is now part of the household of the dragon. And when they meet on the battlefield, Tarhunash's own son confronts him as an ally now of his enemy, the dragon. Tarhunash says to his son, he says, I don't want to kill you. This is nonsense. Forsake the dragon and come back home. And then you can help me and everything will be fine again. And the son says this. He said, I have given my oath to my father-in-law, the dragon. If I violate the oath, I no longer have any honor. I cannot do what you ask. And the storm god has to kill his own son. So the glowing eyes, the darkness, all this, these elements are scattered now. We're talking about a Hittite myth. We're talking about something that's over 3,000 years old. And we're talking about a Nart saga that was recorded probably sometime in the early 20th century, late 19th century. But the Caucasus is a deep freeze. It keeps things going for long after everyone else has shifted and gone on to other stuff. And in fact, this is probably a reassignment of these weird elements, a preservation of these weird elements that were crucial and made sense back 3,500 years ago and are now still there, but sort of floating around and still have this profound evocative power. And furthermore, the explanation, if we want to give one for these, goes back to this Hittite, and we have another entire theme thrown in for free, so to speak, and that's the Romeo and Juliet theme and the tragedy of star-crossed young lovers, which goes into the whole idea that when you have to find a mate, you have to go outside the familiar, comfortable confines of your family to somebody else, perhaps strange, different, new, with a family with different interests and different ideas and so forth. Mating, perpetuating the species, involves serious stress upon young people. And the myths capture this. So we can explain that too. Now, what happened to all the scary stuff? Have I gotten rid of that? No, I don't think so. It's nice to understand where it's all coming from. It gives a kind of intellectual coherence and background to all of this. But the fact remains that these images that come up still are enormously powerful, whether they make a lot of sense or not. And if we can't trace some of them, and we can't trace most of them, I've done a handful. That's about all. You've pretty much seen everything I can do. The last rabbit out of my hat, I've yanked it out. Okay. The rest of the stuff remains unknown. Did it make sense at one time? Maybe. But that's still beside the point. The point is that it's powerful. It's something you will never forget. And you tell it to your kids, you know what? They're not going to forget it either. And they're going to tell it to their kids. And you know what? You guessed it. Those grandchildren, they're not going to forget it either. They stick with you down the generations. It's built in. And in fact, 3,000 years, lots of children, lots of generations down the line, you're gone in dust, believe me, forgotten. And still, those images are traveling down through the corridors of ages. This is one reason why I sometimes call mythology deep sight, because if you go down to now and you look back, you gain a kind of time machine insight. You're looking deep, you're seeing deep back into the past, using these persistent and powerful images that echo down through the ages, literally, and can be used in different ways, and perhaps mean different things to different generations. But the images are still there, and their power and their weirdness is still there. And by the weirdness, I mean that tingle and that puzzle, and you feel compelled. I have to figure out what in the world this is about. And people come to me very frequently, my students, and they say, what do you think this myth is saying? I said, I don't know. I mean, clearly the hero kills the dragon and so forth, and that's what happens, but I don't really know the deep meaning. And it's something really I'm not so equipped to do, but me as a psychologist, we find rich, fertile ground here. And here we have machinery, elements, items we can manipulate, look at, and find attested, and we can examine them. And these are building blocks of the human mind. these are sort of basic atoms, elements of meaning and sense that have significance for our lives. And they come out in totally unexpected ways. The Minotaur, I haven't mentioned that one before. The dark eyes floating about. The beautiful rainbow that connects the home of the gods to humans and whatnot. These sorts of things. And they have their own, let's say, integrity and autonomy and power. It's sort of almost beyond us in a way because they're part of the heritage of the entire species. And they will be part of the mythology forever. And this is what makes mythology. And this is why mythology lasts as it does for millennia, passing through generation after generation, transformation after transformation, and reutilization for concepts, ideas, and worries that no one could have anticipated, say, 3,000 years ago. So let me make some final points here. There's some very interesting things that have happened, say, in the last 500 years, and they're generally linked to the Renaissance and European developments. So there were similar things, I've seen similar things in the history of Japan in the last 300 or 400 years. Certainly things were going on in China too, maybe some other places in the world. And some things have emerged that are novel, that we haven't seen before. One of the more bizarre, perhaps, if you're not into it, is modern mathematics. And the use of notation, which you open a math book, an algebra book, a calculus book, you see all these weird symbols and whatnot. It was only about 300 years old. Before that, math problems were diagrams and some kind of what we think of as a square root equation. It was actually a square. Or a cubic equation, x to the cube. It was actually a cube, and they worried about the cube, and they built little cubes and things and tried to figure out what was going on. And it was an accountant using a shorthand that came up with the idea of notation. Very, very clever. Something new, and it blossomed. This whole thing exploded. Now, well, some of the stuff going on in math is beyond all comprehension except for a handful of people, and no one person can master more than a tiny area or two in this field. And so, is there anything in myth about math? No, not that I know of. Okay, what else is going on? Well, very, very modern medicine, say, or say science and black holes and quarks and all this sort of stuff. Is there anything in myth about some of this? Well, there may be something about the origin of the universe and this sort of thing. Maybe there's some, but a great deal no. So myth is persistent, myth is old, myth is foundational, but it doesn't preclude things that are new. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. Because in the world you live in, and the one I've spent my life in, it's characterized by change and by new things. And whether or not we can make sense out of them will depend upon our utilization of our machinery for doing that. And that lies in myth. And if we can bring myth over to politics, it may lie in politics as well. But in effect, the challenge of making sense out of our world is a genuine challenge. It's a real challenge. It's not a failing. It's not that you don't know what to do. You got to figure it out because this is new stuff, and the old heritage of trying to explain it is not enough anymore. We have to face up to the fact that we're going somewhere where humans have never gone before. It sounds like Star Trek. Well, hey, a little myth there, right? But we're really confronted with this problem as a tangible effect in our lives. And I think that this is kind of important to understand because as much as I love myth and talk about myth and spend my time on myth, I have to recognize, too, there's a lot that myth will not do. And we have to face up to that and do it bravely.